Yeah? Let me just turn on the recording. Okay, good morning. Our Talmud Torah, I want to thank our Talmud Torah sponsor, Avram and Shane D. Kelman, with the hope and prayer that Tisha B'Av will be a chag filled with joy in the eternal Beis HaMikdash. Our Daf Yomi Perek sponsors, Jeffrey and Sherry Venick and Stephen and Holly Venick, in memory of their father, Herman Venick, Chana Yisrael ben Ruvain Zal. Herman was a beloved husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and a long-time pillar of our Kehillah. May our collective learning serve as an aliyah for his neshama. Also, the Week of Learning, sponsored by Akiva Andrews in honor of his wife, Dr. Karen Andrews' academic appointment as a lecturer at Hebrew University, and by Ira Miriam Grossman in the merit of a refuah shlema for all those in need. And also another late added dedication, a little awkward for me, but thank you very much, Dr. Morris and Ann Ellen Gavant, who, in gratitude to me for effort and diligence in teaching the Daf Yomi when the rabbi's away, and also by Dr. Gavant on behalf of the Daf Yomi Chabura. So thank you very much, Dr. Gavant, online. Okay, so we're going to get started here. Today's daf is Daf Yud Beis in Eruvin, and we are going to pick up at the second to bottom line of Yud Aleph Amud Beis. So it says the Gemara, Ibai lehu Rabbi Eliezer lechayim v'kara kamar, or doma lechayim below kara kamar. So the question is, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer was quoted as saying, we talked about the fact that Beis Shammai said you need a lechi and a korah, Beis Hillel said you need a lechi or a korah, and then Rabbi Eliezer said you need two lechis. So on the face of it, this would seem like a strange question. It seems you need two lechis. Why would the Gemara ask, is it two lechis plus a korah, or is it two lechis alone? And I think the reason is because Rabbi Eliezer was a Talmud of Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai held you need a lechi and a korah. So I think the question is, when Rabbi Eliezer comes, was he just coming to build on the halach of his Rabbi Beis Shammai and saying in addition to a lechi and korah you also need a second lechi? Or was he just saying two lechis is enough, that he had a different opinion? So it says the Gemara, let's try and figure out, is it two lechis or one, or is it two lechis alone, or is it two lechis with a korah? Tashma Maisab Rabbi Eliezer. A story happened with Rabbi Eliezer being the Tana who said it needs two lachis. Shahalach Eitzer Rabbi Yossi ben Preda Talmido, that he went to visit his Talmud, Rabbi Yossi ben Preda, Le'ovalin, which Rashi says is a Malkum, that was the name of the city where he was. Umatzao, when Rabbi Eliezer got there, he found Rabbi Yossi ben Preda, Sheyoshe b'mavoi she'ein lo yela lechi echad. He saw that he lived, or he was sitting in a mavoi that only had one lechi. So Amar Lo, so his Rebbe says to him, B'ni, my son, asa lechi acher, you should make a second lechi. Excuse me. To which Rabbi Yossi ben Preda responded, Amar Lo, he said to his Rabbi Eliezer, V'chila sosma anitzarech, do I need to close up this whole mavui? Amar Le, yisasim imabakach. Yes, close it up, and big deal. Who cares? Like why? And there's not such a big deal. Yes, you should close it up with an additional lechi. Continues the Brisa, although this beginning of the Brisa so far is what's relevant for our inquiry, but the Brisa continues and says, Amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Lo nechel kol Beis Shammai Beis Hillel amavoi shehu pachos me'arba amos she'enu tzarech klum, that when Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue, Beis Hillel saying you need lechi or korah, and Beis Shammai saying you need a lechi and a korah, that is only, that is not talking about the mavoi that's opening is less than 4 amos, because that would not need anything. It doesn't need anything. So where do they argue? Alman nechaku. In what case do Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argue? Al rachu me'arba amos v'ad eser, from 4 amos to 10. In that case, they argue Beis Shammai amar lechi v'korah. Beis Shammai say you need both a lechi and a korah. Beis Hillel amar o lechi o korah. You need one or the other. So obviously that's different than our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel that if it's less than 4 amos, everyone agrees. Beis Shammai agrees to Beis Hillel that you only need a lechi or a korah, but not both. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's version says up to 4 amos, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, it seems he would be saying everyone agrees that he needs nothing. So we're going to pick up on this later in the Gemara, but we brought this brisa for the purpose of trying to figure out, did Rabbi Eliezer require 2 lechis and a korah, or just 2 lechis? So says the Gemara, so let's learn from the beginning of this story, when Rabbi Eliezer went to his Talmud, Rabbi Yossi ben Preda, Katani Mihas, we learned at least, V'chila Sosma Ani Tzarech, Rabbi Yossi ben Preda said back to his Rabbi, do I need to seal up this mavui? So if you say that when Rabbi Eliezer requires 2 lechis, he means 2 lechis and a korah, mishum hachi amar v'chilasosma anitzarech. So then it makes sense why Rabbi Yossi ben Preda would say to him, Rabbi, do I need to close up the whole mavoi? Do I need to put 2 lechis and a korah, which is essentially a tzuris HaPesach? So Elei amret lechiyayim below korah. But if you're going to tell me, so that makes sense. If you say that Rabbi Eliezer requires a korah and 2 lechis, so that's sealing up the mavoi. But if you say that he just requires 2 lechis and he doesn't require a korah, mila sosmo, then what does that mean to seal it up? 2 lechis doesn't seem to be a seal. So then Gemara answers, no, there's no proof from that brisa. Hachi kamer, this is what he meant when he said v'chila sosmo b'lechiyayin anitzarech. He was saying, do I need to seal it up with lechis? So some Rishonim, the Rashba, others say that we're talking about a very thin mavoi. So that 2 lechis were closing it up, or maybe just it's an expression. He's saying, do I need to close it up? Meaning, do I actually need 2 lechis? And he said, yes, you need 2 lechis, and what's the big deal? But we do not have a conclusive proof from here as to whether Rabbi Eliezer is saying 2 lechis and a korah, or just 2 lechis alone. Okay, so once we reference this brisa, we had the second part of the brisa, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So it says the Gemara, Amar Mar, we said in the brisa, Amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, Lo nechluku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel amavi shepachas me'arba amos she'ein tzarich klum, that everyone agrees, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that you don't need anything if your mavi is less than 4 amos wide. So ask the Gemara, wait a second, this brisa conflicts with our Mishnah. V'ha'anan tanan, we learned in our Mishnah as follows, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmud Echad Lefnei Rabbi Akiva, that there was one Talmud sitting in front of Rabbi Akiva who taught in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, Lo nechluku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel amavi shepachas me'arba amos she'u niter o b'lechi o b'korah. The way that's taught is that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel don't argue about less than 4 amos, meaning Beis Shammai is maskim, agrees to Beis Hillel that you only need a lechi or a korah, you don't need a lechi and a korah. So in our Mishnah's version, from 0 to 4 amos needs a lechi or a korah, whereas in Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's version, it seems from 0 to 4 amos doesn't need anything, and it's tzarich klum, it doesn't need anything. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Ashi, no, here's how you have to read it. Hachi kamer, this is what it's saying. Eino tzarich lechi v'korah k'Beis Shammai, v'lo lechiyayin k'Rabbi Eliezer. It doesn't require any of the added stringencies that are in the machlokus when it's greater than 4 amos, meaning you don't require both a lechi and a korah like Beis Shammai, or you don't require a second lechi like Rabbi Eliezer, ella o lechi o korah k'Beis Hillel. But rather, all you need is either a lechi or a korah like Beis Hillel. So it's saying that in Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, so what we're answering is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel in the brisa is exactly like our Mishnah. He just uses a different language. The way he says it is everyone agrees, less than 4 amos, you don't need anything. What does he mean? You don't need anything extra on top of Beis Hillel's base halacha of either a lechi or a korah, i.e. you do not need a lechi and a korah, or you don't need 2 lechis. But really, there's no difference between the brisa and our Mishnah. They're both saying the same thing, that from 0 to 4, everyone agrees that a lechi or a korah is sufficient. Okay, says the Gemara, the kama. So we're talking about the fact that. So the question is, Rashi says, how much less? In other words, we introduced this concept that less than 4 amos, you need a lechi or a korah. The Gemara assumes that at a certain point there's some amount of a mavoi that doesn't need anything. So the kama, meaning how much less? Rashi says, kama yehepachos rochvo me'arba amos. How much less than 4 amos wide can it be? V'yehei tzarich tikkun, that it still needs a tikkun. In other words, is it really, like I said before, 0 to 4, or does it start somewhere north of 0 and there is actually an amount of width that would not require anything at all? So v'kama amar Rav Achlai v'yitem Rav Yechiel, that Rav Achlai and others say, Rav Yechiel say ad arba, until 4 tfachim. So therefore, we're going to say that we now have the following levels: is from 0 to 4 tfachim you require nothing. From 4 tfachim to 4 amos, everyone agrees to Beis Hillel that you require just a lechi or a korah. From 4 amos to 10 amos, you're going to have a machlokas. Beis Hillel says lechi or korah, Beis Shammai says lechi and korah, and Rabbi Eliezer says lechayayin. Now, the Rishonim explain, and this is brought la'alacha, that when it talks about ar arba until 4 tfachim, that it doesn't need any lechi or korah, it's actually talking a little bit more complicated case, because if it was just talking about a mavoi and the whole length of the mavoi was 4 tfachim or less than 4 tfachim, that would be a makom patur, and no one would have any havamina that you would require a lechi or korah. So the Mefarshim explained that the case we're dealing with is you had a less than 4 tfachim opening to the Rosh Hashanah, but then as it went back, it widened so that the mavoi actually had greater than dalad al dalad, which is what takes it out of the category of a makom patur and makes it into Rosh Hashanah. And it's simply saying if the entryway to this mavoi that ultimately expanded or widened a little bit to become greater than dalad al dalad, if that opening is less than 4 tfachim, then everyone would agree that it does not require any fix at the front end. It does not require even a lechi or a korah. Okay, so says the Gemara, Amr Rav Sheshes, Amr Rav Yirmiyah Ba'arba Amr Rav, Modim Chachamim l'Rabbi Eliezer b'Pasei Chatzer. Okay, so we have a machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer, which we'll see in a minute. We're going to see what that is. But the question is, by a mavoi, we have a machlokas as to whether you require 1 lechi or 2 lechis. But Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says you need 2 lechis in our Mishnah. So what we're going to say is that even those who argue on Rabbi Eliezer in the case of a mavoi and say you don't need 2 lechis and with 1 lechi it's sufficient, they don't disagree. They agree with him that you need 2 lechis in the case of a chatzer. So what are we talking about? So we know that you don't necessarily have a lechi and a korah. In the classic case of a chatzer we've been talking about, it opens from Rosh Hashanah to a mavoi. From the mavoi to the chatzer, you can carry as long as you have shutufei mavos. You don't have 2 lechis there. So what case are we talking about? We're talking about a case where the chatzer opens l'makom ha'aser lo into a place that it otherwise couldn't carry. For example, if the chatzer opened directly onto a Rosh Hashanah, or if the chatzer opened onto a karmelis, or if the chatzer opened onto another chatzer. So then, in other words, we've talked about that before, the chatzer gadol and chatzer katana. So if it's a place that's aser to it, so then if you're going to fix the chatzer, you require 2 lechis, and in the case of a chatzer, we call it a pas, which is a board. But in other words, the idea wouldn't be that you need 2 of those in a case where the chatzer is not opening into a place that's mutter to it. So just to close what I said before, in the regular case we've been talking about, where you have chatzeros that open onto a mavoi, the chatzer does shitufei mavos, and therefore the mavoi becomes a makom ha-mutter law. It's a place that you could carry from the chatzer to the mavoi, so then the chatzer does not require pasim, and does not require 2 boards at the entrance. Okay, but what we're saying is that when you in fact have to rectify, when you have to fix a chatzer, then you have to fix it with 2 pasim, not with just 1 lechi. Okay, so says the Gemara, Rav Nachman Amar, so Rav Nachman said, halacha Rabbi Eliezer b'pasei chatzer. The halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer and pasei chatzer. So we have two statements here. Rav Sheshes in the name of Yirmiyah Rabba, in the name of Rab, says that the Chachamim agree to Rabbi Eliezer, and Rav Nachman says that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. So therefore, the implication is that according to Rav Nachman, the Chachamim argue on Rabbi Eliezer, but the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer, whereas according to Rav Sheshes in the name of Yirmiyah Rabba, in the name of Rav, that the Chachamim are actually moda that you require 2, so there's no machlokas. So says the Gemara, Amr Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak man modim. Nachman bar Yitzchak says, who's modim? Rebbe. So that when we say the Chachamim are moda, that so to whom are they moda? Meaning, what position are they adopting? They're adopting the position of Rebbe. We learned before when we were explaining, and we're going to get back to it. It's very hard to get away from this case of the Chatzer Gedolah Shenifritz Katana, and we talked about the sides. In that context, we described that Rebbe is of the opinion that you require 2 pasim, because we had asked, why isn't 1 lechi with lavud enough? And we said it's Rebbe that requires 2. So when we say the Chachamim are moda, to what position are they moda? They're moda to the position that was later adopted by Rebbe. And according to the version, halacha mechlal de pligi, man palagaleh. So, and according to the second version, which was Rav Nachman, where he said not that the Chachamim are moda to Rabbi Eliezer, but that the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer, implying that the Chachamim actually argue and say that only 1 pas is required by Chatzar. That's Rabbanan. So where do we have the Rabbanan and Rebbe? The Sanya, here's the source for that machlokas Rebbe and the Rabbanan. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa, Chatzer niteres b'pas echad, according to the Tanakama, which we're calling the Rabbanan, that a Chatzer, when it needs to be rectified, can be rectified with one board, one lechi. Rebbe Yomer b'shnei pasim, with two boards, two lechis. Okay, so so we have a either a machlokas and a halacha that you need two, or everyone agrees that you need two. Okay, Amr Basi, Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Chatzer tzricha shnei pasin. So Rabbi Yassi says in Rabbi Yochanan that a Chatzer needs two pasin. So this would seem to be the halacha of Rebbe, that if you have to fix a Chatzer, you need two lechis or two boards. Amr le Reb Zera le Rabasi. So Reb Zera said to Rabasi, you just said that in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Mi Amr Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Did Rabbi Yochanan actually say this? But you yourself, you Rabasi, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan the following halacha: Pasei Chatzer tzrichin shehei ben dalid, that the boards of a Chatzer need to be 4 tvachim. So you have conflicting statements. Now you might ask, why are those conflicting? In other words, on the one hand he's saying you need 2 boards, and then he's saying they need to be 4 tvachim. So the Gemara says, that's a stira. Now the Gemara says, well, wait a second. If you're going to say maybe it's not a stira, arba mikan v'arba mikan. Now maybe it means yes, you need 2 boards, you need 2 lechis, and each one needs to be 4 tvachim. So what's the stira about this? So the Gemara says, but that doesn't work. V'hatani, we learned in the Brisa, Revada bar Avimi kamed Reb Chanina, v'amila kamed Reb Chanina bar Papi. The Revada bar Avimi said in front of Reb Chanina, or others say in front of Reb Chanina bar Papi. This is the Brisa we've been referencing, but here's where we're going to see it. Kitana be'eser, ugedola ba'chas esrei. In the Mishnah on Daf Tzadi Beis that we've been discussing many days lately, where you have the small Chatzer that opens onto the large Chatzer. We grappled with this. Why did the Brisa need to say it was 10 for the small Chatzer and 11 for the large? This is the source for that. So therefore, now we know what the problem is. Because if we had a case of a Chatzer, a small Chatzer opening into a large Chatzer, and the large Chatzer was only 1 amma in the aggregate wider than the small Chatzer, so then, and you need 2 pasim, so how much does that leave you? That leaves you 3 tvachim on either side, because an amma is 6 tvachim, so 3 tvachim on either side. So if you're going to, this is a problem now, because if you're going to say that a pas, you need 2 pasim, and you're going to say that each pas needs to be 4 tvachim, then how do you explain the Mishnah, which we understand to be a case of only being 1 amma wider, the large one being only 1 amma wider than the small one? It doesn't work. You can't put 2 pasim of 4 tvachim on either side if all you have is 6 tvachim in the aggregate. So that's why it's a question, how could Rabbi Yochanan say both of these things? Okay, so the Gemara says, Kisalak Rabbi Zera Meyame, when Rabbi Zera, Rashi explains, came up from the sea, he was traveling on the sea, Persha, he explained as follows, Baruch achas be'arba, mishtei ruchos mashu lekan and mashu lekan. So he says as follows, I'll explain to you, you're right, it is a stira based on what we've said, that the case was only 11 and 10, so there was only 1 amma to grapple with. So here's my explanation. When Rabbi Yochanan said that you need 2, that was saying as long as you have 2 that are mashahu, you're fine. But Rabbi Yochanan was also saying, really, you don't need 2, you only need 1. It just needs to be at least 4 tvachim. So there's no longer a stira, because if you're choosing to put on both sides, or circumstances create them on both sides, which would be the case of the Chatzer Katana Shnifritz al Gedola, where it had 3 tvachim on either side, so then you're fine, because once you're putting up 2 lechis, they could be even a mashu according to Rabbi Yochanan. But in a different case, where you had a Chatzer that needs to be fixed, it's enough to do it with 4 tvachim. Now, by the way, I just want to explain, maybe it wasn't clear in previous days because I didn't want to get into it, but in other words, the question we were dealing with of why it was mutter for the larger Chatzer to carry vis-a-vis the smaller Chatzer, it required those side walls, because when you have one Chatzer open to another, it's a makam asr law if they haven't made a Eruvin Chatzeros. So the way you get past that is by putting up 2 pasim. So that's why that case was always established with the 2 sides. We talked about them as a lechi, but maybe it wasn't clear. The reason you had 2 lechis is because we're dealing with a Chatzer, and as we've just learned, the Chatzer requires 2 lechis, or maybe according to Rabbi Yochanan that requires 1 that is 4 tvachim. Okay, so we've resolved the conflict between Rabbi Yochanan. You can either have a 4 tvachim, 1 or 2 that are a little bit. V'hadetani adabar avimi. So now what about this thing that adabar avimi said that the case was 11 amos and 10 amos, so it was 1 amma higher. So now the question becomes, wait a second, why do I need that? Why do I need a full amma? Because if it's on one side, 4 tvachim should be enough. And if it's on both sides, even a mashu is enough. So why do I need a full amma extra? So we actually dealt with this the other day. We said, Rebbe he v'savalak Reb Yossi, when it required dafka 1 amma more, because if you remember, that's what we were grappling with. Why did the Bryce have to say it was 11 and 10? Maybe it's some other number, or maybe it's more than an amma. Is because this is the view of Rebbe, who, as we just learned, requires two lechis or 2 pasim for a chatzar, and he holds like Reb Yossi, who says that each pas needs to be 3 tvachim. So that's why in that particular case, it was like Rebbe that you needed a pas on either side, and it was like Reb Yossi that you needed 3 tvachim on either side. But that is not how Rabbi Yochanan would paskin. Rabbi Yochanan would say 1 with 4 tvachim is enough, or 2 with a mashahu. And our brisa, the brisa that explains the mission on Tzadi Beis, is going like Rebbe in the view of Rabbi Yossi. Okay, Reb Yosef, Reb Yehuda, Shmuel. So now we're going to quote in the name of Shmuel. Rabbi Yosef says the name of Rabbi Yehuda, says the name of Shmuel. Chatzar niteres b'pas echad, that a chatzar can be rectified with a single pas. Amalei Abayla Rav Yosef. So Abayla said to Rav Yosef, wait a second. Mi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Did Shmuel say this? V'Hamarle Shmuel Rav Chananya Bar Shila. Shmuel said to Rav Chananya Bar Shila, At lo savid uvda, when you're doing something lamaisa, when you're fixing a chatzar, o berov dofen, o b'shnei pasin. You need either the majority of the opening you need to seal so that you get a majority that presumably will be omim ruah parts, or shnei pasin, or you need two boards. So here we have a problem, because on the one hand we quoted Shmuel as saying you only need 1 pas, and then we quoted him as saying you need either majority or 2 pasin. Why would you require 2 pasin if we just said you only need 1? So we have a stira. So to which Rav Yosef answered back, Amarle, Vanola Yadana, I don't know what, but I'm just going to tell you, the uvda have bedura de ravasa. So some girsas say that all I know is that there was a story in Dura de Ravasa, which we've referenced before, is a village of shepherds. So there was an actual story, and that's what I was relying on, or that proves my point, says Rav Yosef, that what was the story? Lashon yam hanechnas l'chatzer have. There was the tongue of the sea came into the chatzar, basically saying that you had a chatzar, and the wall came down from the chatzar. The wall of the chatzar had been up against the sea, and basically the wall broke down, and now the wall of the chatzar is basically fronting directly onto the sea. It came in front of Yehuda. He only required one pas. So the Gemara is trying to deal with the fact that, wait a second, you're saying that Shmuel said you need either rov dofen or shnei pasin, and Rav Yosef said you only need 1, and in fact brought a proof from the story. So Amrle, so he said that story is no proof. Lashon yam ka'amret, you're telling me a case of where the wall broke down and the sea was there. Kal hu she'kilu chachamim b'mayim. That there's no proof from that case, because in general Chazal were lenient when it came to filling water. We saw this with Pasei Biros, but even here in a chatzar, Chazal wanted to allow people to draw water. That was very important, and so they introduced leniencies in the halachas relating to drawing water. Where do we see that? Rabbi Tabla Meirav, like Rav Tabla asked Rav, mechitza tluya mahu shetatir v'churba. What's the halacha about a hanging mechitza and a churva? A churva is a ruin. So Rashi explains, we're not actually talking about a ruin here. It's just, since we're talking about a mechitza tluya, which means a mechitza that's hanging down but doesn't reach the ground, where do you typically have something like that, where you have like mechitzas that don't actually rest on the floor? Is typically going to be in a ruin, because walls get knocked out, and you could end up with this scenario. So the question was, what happens if you have a mechitza tluya, which would be where you have valid mechitzos, but they don't actually come within 3 tvachim of the floor? To which Amarle, so Rav said back to Rav Tavla, "Ein mechitza tluya materes el b'mayim." that the only time you can rely on this mechitza tluya, this mechitza that comes down, is by water, because kalhu she'kilu chachamim b'mayim, because the chachamim were mekel by water. And Rashi brings the case. He says, "El b'mayim kigon gezuztera shehilamayla min ayam beperaketza mishtatim." So this is later on in Eruvin on Daf Pezayin. We're going to have the case where a gezuztera is like a porch hanging over, and it hangs over water, and you want to be able to go from your Rishus HaYachid down into the water to draw water. So we say that in that case, if you have mechitzas coming down that don't reach the floor, we're going to treat those mechitzas as if they go to the floor, and it's all Rishus HaYachid, and therefore you could put your pail through a hole in the porch, draw water, and pull it up. So what do you see? You see that when it comes to drawing water, Chazal were lenient. That's why they said mechitza tluya, the mechitza that's removed from the floor. I'm going to give you the one case you can rely on it is the case of where you're drawing water. So what do you see? You see the Chazal tried to be lenient when it comes to drawing water. Okay, so once we see that, so we're going to say that the story that Rav Yosef reported from the village of the shepherds, where he said all you need to do is put up one pas to be able to draw water, maybe that's no proof to what you need in a chutzah regularly. Maybe in a chutzah you normally need two pasin, and the reason that in that particular case, Rav Yehuda, who by the way was a Talmud of Shmuel, because we're trying to figure out Shmuel's opinion, that's why Rav Yehuda paskin maybe that you only need one pas, because it was a case where the water of the chutz, the water of the sea came into the chutzah, or formed the wall of it came into the chutzah, and therefore, as long as you put up a pas, says Rabbi Yehuda, I'm going to allow you to draw water, and you could carry in the chutzah. So we're going to say that's no proof. The story is no proof. Okay, but says the Gemara, Mikol Makam Kasha, but we're left with a kasha, because on the one hand, we have this statement of Rav Yosef in the name of Yehuda in the name of Shmuel that says a chutzah only needs one pas, and on the other hand, we have a statement that Shmuel, or we have the fact that Shmuel said to Rav Chanani bar Shila, either do rov dofen or do shnei pasim. So is it one or is it two? So Kiyasar Rav Papa, Rav Huna brayed Rav Yeshua, Mibei Rav, when Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, came from the base medrash of Rav, Pirshua, they explained it, Meruach achas ba'arba, mishtei ruchos mashu lekan or mashu lekan. So this is the same answer we gave earlier when we had a stira, when we had a stira between the views, and we said when we were talking about the stira and the views of Rabbi Yochanan, we said the answer was when it says you need one pas, that's if you're going to make the pas 4 tvachim. If you want to have less than 4 tvachim, you could also make 2 pasin. So if you put a lechi on either side, then it's enough with lechi mashahu. You don't need a 4 tefach pas, a 4 tefach board. Okay, so that's how we're going to answer. We're going to answer the stira in Shmuel just like we did with Rabbi Yochanan, to say either 2 and they could be a mashu, or 1 and it has to be 4 tvachim. So it says, but continues Rav Papa, I do have a problem. So now I've resolved the stira, or we've resolved the stira of Shmuel, but I have a problem with one of the things you quoted here. Amar Rav Papa, ikashali hakashali. I'm still left with a kasha. The Amar le Shmuel Rav Chanina bar Shila, because we quoted that Shmuel said to Rav Chanina bar Shila, At lo savid uvda ela oberov dofen ober shnei pasim. So it said either I need rov dofen or I need 2 boards. So lamali rov dofen bepas arba sagi. So he says as follows: once you've told me that Shmuel's of the opinion that it's enough to have a 1 board that's 4 tvachim, so why would I ever need rov dofen? If I have a 10 amma opening, why would I need a 5 and a little bit amma board to close it? It should be enough if it's 4 tvachim. We just said 4 tvachim is enough. So why would I need rov dofen? So he says, and if you're going to tell me my rov dofen, when is it that Shmuel said close it up with a rov dofen? Maybe that case was talking about bedofen shiva, that it was where the opening was only 7 tfachim wide, and therefore he was saying, so he's saying the bar ba havile rov dofen. So the Gemara is saying that what did it mean when he said 4? It meant either that he said either you could put up rov dofen, which would be how much? It would be 3, a little more than 3.5, which Shmuel is calling 4. So he says either put up rov dofen or put up 2 pasin. but it was not an option to, or it would not make sense to put up a actual 4 tefach board. This is confusing because he says 4, but what he means is 3.5 and change. And he's saying there's no reason in this scenario to put up a 4 tefach board because that would be more than you need. Because in this scenario, you only need 3 and a little bit, because once you close it up less than 4 tefachim, we've learned before that you don't need it. So we say lama li arba b'shlosho. So the Gemara says, well, lama li arba. So I'm sorry. So what he was saying is dafka in the case of rov dofen, if it's a 7 tefach opening, you could either do 2 things, or you could do a 4 tefach board. So I jumped ahead a little bit. So the Gemara says, Lama li arba b'shlosho mashu sagi. He's saying, but okay, why? Okay, I'm sorry. Here's what he was saying. The story was as follows. So we're saying it's less than, it was 7 tvachim wide. So he said you have a choice. You can either make one that's 3.5 and change, or you can make 2 boards. So now the Gemara is saying, well, and this is the way the Rishonim explained the Gemara. The Gemara is now saying, well, okay, why do I even need 3.5 plus a little bit, which would be rov dofen? He says, b'shlosho mashu sagi. It should be enough with 3 and a little bit. Why? Because if it's a 7 tefach opening, once you put 3 and a little bit, I don't need majority, because again, majority would be 3.5 plus. And he's saying, I don't need 3.5 plus. Even with 3 and a little bit, it'll be enough. Why will 3 and a little bit be enough if it's not rov dofen? Is because we just finished saying before that if the opening to a chatzer is less than 4 tefachim, it doesn't need anything. So why would I say rov dofen that you need to put up 3.5 and change? Forget rov dofen. I can just put up 3 and a little bit, which will take the opening to less than 4 tefachim. If the opening is less than 4 tefachim, I don't need anything. So how could you explain the case to be 7, and he was saying put up 3.5 and change? If it's 7, I have a better solution. Put up 3 and a little bit and take it less than 4 tvachim. The Hamer Rav Achloi v'Yitem Rav Yechiel, because this is the halacha we said before that Rav Achloi or others say it's Rav Yechiel ad arba, that you only need up until 4 tvachim, but if it's less than 4 tvachim, you don't need a lechi or korah. So we have a kasha, which is, why did Shmuel say either rov dofen or 2 pasin? Because we were saying if it's 4 tvachim, he says it's fine. And if it's 2 pasin, it could be even a little bit. And the case we're dealing with is rov dofen. So we're saying it was talking about a 7 tvachim thing. But then why do you need rov dofen? Why do you need 3.5 and change? You should just need 3 and a little bit. So it says the Gemara, because maybe the difference is as follows. That when did Reb Achloi or Reb Yechiel say their halacha? We learned that only by a mavoi. And we know that a mavoi is less chamor than a chatzir, from the fact, if nothing else, the fact that a mavoi only requires 1 lechi mashahu, and a chatzir requires either a lechi of 4 or 2, so you know that a chatzir is more chamer. So maybe when Rav Achloi or Rav Yechiel said their halacha that less than 4 tvachim you don't need anything, was only talking about a mavoi. And we're now dealing with a case of a chatzir. So therefore it's insufficient to do 3 and a little bit, we're going to say, and that's why Shmuel couldn't suggest that, because the halacha that less than 4 you need nothing is not a halacha by chatzir. So now, once that option is gone, so you're dealing with a 7 tefach opening, so we're going to say to that Shmuel said, either do rov dofen, which would be 3.5 plus a little bit, you don't need 4, or do 2 pasin. So now we've explained what he meant when he said rov dofen or 2 pasin. Alternatively, the Rav Achloi gufei tanoihi. So in other words, we assumed that was an option for, in other words, maybe that Rav Achloi holds his halacha even by a chatzir. And he would say by a chatzir, it's enough to do 3 and a tiny bit, because that takes it less than 4. But now says the Gemara, that itself, that halacha of Rav Achloi, that he applies to both a mavoi and a chatzir, might be a machlokas tanayim, and therefore Shmuel did not want to rely on that option of 3 and a tiny bit. So he said either do rov dofen, which is 3.5 plus a little bit, or do shnei pasim. Okay, so we've now not only explained the stira of Shmuel, which is to say that he holds you can either have 1 pas of dalat tvachim or 2 smaller ones, but we've also explained the story where he said rov dofen or 2 pasim was talking about a case where 4 tefach closure was not even an option. It was only a question of, is it shnei pasim on the one hand, or you could do, the debate was 3.5 plus a little bit, or 3 plus a little bit, and we're saying the 3 plus a little bit you would not do, because Shmuel was saying that itself is a machlokas tanayim. Okay, says the Gemara, 3 lines on the bottom. Taner Rabbanan, Lashon Yama Nechnas Achatzer. So now this is a little bit different case than before. Before we learned that the wall fell down and the entire Chatzer was open to the sea. Now we're saying a different case where there was a break in the wall of the Chatzer, which was greater than 10 amos, but you still had walls on either side. So if people are looking at the pictures, I'm sorry, we haven't been good about the pictures here. This would be picture 97. So you have the water opens, the Chatzer opens up to the water, but there are still remnants of the wall on either side. Okay, so you don't fill water in while you're in the Chatzer from this water. You can't fill from this water on Shabbos. Unless you put in a mechitza of some sort that is 10 tfachim, and you see that picture. You see that picture in number 97. So the Gemara says, "B'medvar mamurim." What's the case we're talking about? Where the pirza is more than 10 amos, that's when you require the mechitza. Aval asara ein tzarich klum. But if it would be less than 10, you wouldn't need it. You wouldn't need it. Why? Because then it's just a Pesach, and it's as if the wall is fully closed, even when there's an opening. That's a basic halacha in mechitzas. So now the Gemara says the Gemara, "Memale hudulay memalilan ha taltule mitalinan." So the Gemara says, well, wait a second. It says that if you have this scenario, you cannot fill water unless you put up that mechitza that's 10 tfachim tall. But the Gemara says, why are you talking about filling up water? What about the fact that it should be usher to carry in this Chatzer? Why? Because we know if it's parts b'malua l'makama asr law, that if you have a Chatzer that opens in its entirety, and Rashi explains that greater, he says it doesn't have to be everything, yosem asar kari le milua, that anything that's more than 10 amos, we're going to call it, that's parts b'malua. So we learned before, when we were talking about the Chatzer katana shen nifritza l'gedola, we talked about the fact, the concept that comes up multiple times in Eruvin, that if you have a Chatzer or an area that's paritz b'malua l'makam asr, that's fully open to an area that's asr to it, you're not allowed to carry in that Chatzer that opens up to the area you can't carry into. So when you have the Yam, and it's more than 10 amos wide, and it opens to the Yam, so it's basically saying the Yam is a Carmelis, and you cannot carry from the Chatzer into a Carmelis, so therefore you should not be able to carry into the Chatzer at all. So why did the Brisa say you can't fill with water unless you put a mechitza? Why didn't the Brisa say you can't carry in the Chatzer unless you put up a mechitza? Because since it's parts b'malua to the sea, it should be, and the sea is a makam asr law because it's a Carmelis, it should be asr to carry in the Chatzer altogether. Forget drawing water. So it says the Gemara. So we say v'had nifritza Chatzer b'malua l'makam asr law. So it says the Gemara on the base. What are we talking about here? The Islay Gidude. The reason you're allowed to carry in the Chatzer is because we had this concept of the Gidude when we talked about whether how wide an opening could be, a pirza and the mavoi. So we said Gidude was as distinct from opening up to a place that's a makam matunaf where you wouldn't want to carry. Gidude is where there was actual physical impediment, that the wall had collapsed, but there was still remnants of the wall at the bottom. That's the context we had it before. So here we're going to explain it. If you look at 98, is the concept that when the Chatzer became open when the Chatzer became open to the sea and the sea came in, there was still Gidude, there were small walls, there was still mechitza underneath the water, and those mechitzas were enough to allow you to still carry, because it's not considered parts b'malua l'makam asr law, because it's not parts b'malua, because there's still a small wall there, and that's why you're able to carry. So then you might ask, well, wait a second, if there's small walls there, so then why do I need to put up a mechitza in order to draw water? So the Tosfos has a more complicated explanation, but many of the Rishonim learn that because we're going to see this concept later. We're going to see this concept later in Eruvin, the irvo b'maya. The idea is that if you have water that's connected to other water, it assumes the status of the connected water. So since the water that's in the Yam is not mutter because it's in a Carmelis, so therefore even the water that made its way into the Chatzer, despite the fact that there were gidudim here, that there were small walls beneath the level of the water which enabled you to carry in the Chatzer, that's not enough to enable you to draw water, because the water is connected to the water that's outside, and therefore you cannot draw it unless you put up a mechitza. Okay, so that's why it said you need to put up a mechitza in that particular scenario. It says the Gemara, top line in Yud Beis Amud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda mavui shelo nishtatu by hechshir belechi. He says that if you have a mavui that there has been no shitufei mevos done in it, and shitufei mevos, as we know, is the multiple chatzers are mishtatif. They buy food together and they put it in one of the chatzeros, and that enables you to carry in the mavi. Now the Gemara is going to ask, why are we talking about shitufei mevos here? But we'll see that. Mavi shelo nishtatu bo. If you have a mavi that did not have the chatzeros that open to it, having done shitufei mevos, hechshiru belechi, and then you put up a lechi, so then hazorek letocho chayav. That someone who's going to throw from a Rishus HaRabim into that mavui is chayav for throwing a midaraisa from a Rishus HaRabim to a Rishus HaYachid. Hechshira b'kora, but if you only fix that mavui with a kora, hazarek l'tochol pater, that someone who throws into it is going to be pater. So what's going on here? So you have, in the way we're understanding the case initially, you have a regular mavui with 3 walls that opens to Rishus HaRabim. And what it's telling you is you have to put up if you put up a lechi and then you throw from Rishus HaRabim into it, it's a Rishus HaYachid and you're chayav. But if you put up a korah, you're not chayav. So clearly what's going on here is we must hold that in order to be chayav for throwing from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, it has to have 4 walls. And a lechi constitutes a 4th wall, and a korah doesn't. So we're going to have to say that a lechi is mishum mechitza, that lechi functions as a mechitza, and a korah does not. So that's why, if you put up a lechi, it now has 4 walls, and it's Rishus HaYachid d'oraisa, and if you throw into it, you're chayav. But if you put up a korah, that's not considered a 4th wall, that's just a heker, and therefore if you throw into it, you're going to be pater. Okay, interesting halacha. Maskiv lo Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes asked on this, wait a second, you're saying that the point here was, you said it's a mavui that they didn't have shitufei mevos. Time at the lod nishtatfu bo. You're saying the reason this halacha is so is because they weren't mishtativ. Han nishtatfu bo afilu achsher b'korah nami chayav. But if they would have done shitufei mevos, then somehow even if you had a korah, it would be considered a valid Rishus HaYachid d'oraisa and you'd be chayav for throwing in. So it says the Gemara, what's the theory that doing shitufei mevos, which is clearly a rabbinic institution, that should somehow make this into a Rishus HaYachid now that you'd be chayav for throwing into it? And to, first of all, logically it doesn't make sense. And to boot, there's a brisa of Hatanya. We learned a brisa. It says chatzer shel rabim, that if you have a chatzer that belongs to multiple people, mavos she'enu mefulashin, or you have a regular mavoi that's not mefulish, Bein irvu ubein lo irvu, whether you did an erev or shitufei mevos, or you didn't do it, hazaruk l'tochon chayav, that if you throw into it, you're chayav. So what does it imply? It implies that you don't, that it surely makes no difference whether you did shitufei mevos. So the question is, what are you talking about? Mavish lo nishtatfu bo. Why would shitufei mevos make a difference? So we're going to say, okay, let's revise what we're saying. If something was said, this is what was said. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, mavoi she'ena roi l'shituf, that if you have a mavoi that's not roi to shituf, what would be a case of a mavoi that's not roi l'shituf, unless you turn it into something else, would be a mavoi mefulish. That if you have so we're not talking about a 3-walled mavoi, we're talking about a 2-walled mavoi. So he says, mavoi she'ena roi l'shituf, hechshiru belechi, hazarek l'tochon chayav. That if you put up a lechi, so now there's a 3rd wall, so then you're chayav because 3 walls makes it a Rishus HaYachid d'oraisa. Hechshir b'koro, but if you're machshir with a kora, hazarek l'tochel pater, that if someone throws into it, he's going to be pater because a kora does not make a mechitza. Alma, so as I've just said, Alma Kasavar, we see that he holds lechi misham mechitza, the kora misham heker, that a lechi is a mechitza, and therefore if you have 2 walls of a mavoi mefulish, and you put up a lechi, that's enough to make a third wall, and now you're chayav for Rishus HaYachid d'oraisa. But if you put up a kora, that's not a mechitza, and therefore you're just left with 2 walls. V'chein Rabba, so said Rabba lechi misham mechitza, v'kor misham heker. Lechi is misham mechitza, and kor is a heker. Rabba says echaz av misham heker. That both a lechi or a kora are a heker, and it does not make it into Rishus HaYachid d'oraisa if you have 2 walls and you put up a lechi. So ask the Gemara, Eisvei Rav Yaakov bar Abba l'Rava. Rav Yaakov bar Abba asked Rava, Hazarik l'mavui, if someone throws into a mavui, yesh lo lechi chayev, ein lo lechi pater. If it has a lechi, you're chayev for throwing it. If it doesn't have a lechi, you're pater. So that seems to be saying that a lechi is a mechitza. We say, hachi karmer, this is what it's saying. Eino tzarech elo lechi, if it's a lechi, if it's a mavui that only requires a lechi, meaning it's a 3-walled, closed-in mavui, then hazarik l'tochel chayev, that it's someone throws into his chayav, lechi v'davar acher. But if it's a mavui mefulish, a two-walled mavui that needs either a tzuris pesach and a lechi or a delis and a lechi, so then if it's then azar l'tocho pater, that someone who throws into a two-walled mavui is not chayav because midaraisa you need three walls. So all it's saying is the business about a lechi was not telling you a halacha that you need a lechi. It was telling you that if the case was one where a lechi is sufficient, i.e. a closed mavoi, then it's a rishus yachid araisa. And if it's a case where you need more than just a lechi, i.e. it's a mavoi mefulish and only has two walls, then that's not a rishus yachid araisa. They asked on Rava as follows. This is the case which we had before. We dealt with Yeser Kenam Rabbi Yehuda. We talked about this the other day that Rabbi Yehuda, on top of saying if you have an overpass where Pitik or Yorev Visosim that you could carry beneath the overpass that passes over a Shus Rabbim that has two walls, we talked about it before. So in addition to that, Rabbi Yehuda said, if someone has houses on either side of Rishus Rabbim, so these are essentially walls on either side of Rishus Rabbim, also lechi mikan, or kar mikan, v'nosim be'emtza, and you could carry in it. So what do you see? You see that a lechi or a korah makes something into a rishus yachid that you could carry. So therefore the question is on Rava. So why is it that the lechi works by Rabbi Yehuda to make it into a rishus yachid, and now you're able to carry even what used to be a rishus rabbim? So the Gemara says, Amrullah, they said to him, Ein ma'arvin rishus rabbim. I'm sorry, this was part of the brisa that the Chum said to him, Amrullah, Ein ma'arvin rishus rabbim bekach. That you can't just put up those two lechis or the two koros. But the basic point is, as Rashi points out, even according to the Chachamim who said you can't be ma'arver rishus rabbim bekach, they don't seem to argue with the idea that the lechi can enclose it. It's only because it's in a rishus rabbim. But if it would be a mavi mefulish, they seem to agree that two lechis would be enough, and therefore lechi seems to be a mechitza. And Rava said lechi is not a mechitza. So the Gemara says lechi is still not a mechitza. And when Rabbi Yehuda said that, I explained this the other day. Hasam because of Rabbi Yehuda, shtei mechitzas d'oraisa. That when you have a house on either side, those are two houses. That's two walls. According to Rabbi Yehuda, two walls is a rishus rabbim, is a rishus yachid d'oraisa. Just that you need to put up the lechis, that's only to make a hecker, to make a distinction. So Rava would tell you, why is it that in that case it's a rishus yachid? That's only like Rabbi Yehuda who says that two walls is enough, but the Chachamim would say two walls is not enough, so that's not a rishus rabbim d'oraisa, but it has nothing to do with a lechi. A lechi is not making a mechitza in that case. Okay, I apologize, we'll stop here, I will record this last little bit. Okay, a good Chodesh and a good Shabbos.